Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Bergs. I'm a managing director at Protiviti in our enterprise cloud division and the Global AWS Alliance lead. We're here today with both Stephen Yang and Harry Liu, who are associate directors at Protiviti. We're going to be talking a little bit about security and compliance in AWS. And something that comes with that prospect is compliance in cloud and why it's so difficult and why shouldn't it be easy? Given the fact that all of these cloud providers, AWS has tremendous amounts of security and compliance tools, but it's still a challenge to organizations. They still struggle. So I'm going to turn this question over and kind of the thoughts over to both Stephen and Harry, and they're going to introduce themselves, and we'll start talking about the topic of why compliance is difficult within the cloud, and specifically at AWS. And I'll turn it over to Harry. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Mike. So Harry Liu here, associate director based out of our Dallas office. So a lot of the organizations have, been on the journey migrating to cloud for a while now, right? If we count the fact that AWS was built 20 years ago, it's been a long journey. But there are still plenty that are either just started or in very early stage of their journey. So we're observing different maturity, but in the meantime, regardless of the maturity, we're observing some common challenges in this compliance thing is definitely one of them. We there are various different reasons behind it we're going to get into. We'll also talk about how we usually advise our clients to get through the challenges. um, to begin with, my colleague Stephen here has a very good analogy he always uses. So I'll let him go through that and talk about some of the process gaps and knowledge gaps that we're observing in the industry today.
Stephen Yang here. So I'm an associate director based out of our New York Metro office. Very excited to be here and talking to all of you about AWS and compliance in AWS. The way I like to describe to my customer is, can imagine yourself as a shipping company, right? Then you got two type of customer that come to you. You got one type say, hey, Steven, I got this gigantic box that I want to ship overseas. Can you do it for me? While you do it, I want to make sure this box, this big box has to be certain dimension. You gotta make sure it's safe, right? But it's one gigantic box. Then you got another type of customer that come to you and say, hey, Steven, now I got 100 boxes or could be 1,000 boxes that all want to ship at the same time. And then I want to make sure each of these boxes need to be its own dimension, right? Like box A might be 3 x 5 feet, where box B is completely different, right? So AWS is kind of like customer. When you migrate to AWS, it's kind of like customer. You got dealing with customer B all the time, right? You got all these different teams have different things that they want to do within AWS environment. It's so easy for them to do it. Now they can spawn out microservices, they can spawn out Lambda function all day long, right? But that becomes a challenge for your security and compliance organization, because your security and compliance organization is the organization that keep the ship together, right? So before I got one single box, now I gotta manage 1,000 boxes. So you kind of do the math there, right? So I personally think the second one is a lot harder to do. Um, but coming back to like the question, right? I do think this now, if I kind of break it down, there's the process gap and then there's the knowledge gap. Process gap, if you think about it, like in the old world, I can do audit and compliance maybe on uh, 4 times per year on quarterly basis. I do that because my server doesn't change that much, right? I order a server, it takes months to get shipped out, and for the most part, these things that I looked at is rigid. It doesn't change. When you go to AWS, like I said, like you're dealing with 1,000 boxes, so things always change. You got to keep up with that automation. You got to keep up with that process change. So that's very difficult. Um, and then the second gap, big gap, is knowledge gap. In the And this is true not just for security and compliance, but typically we found that security and compliance organization a lot of time is late to the game, right? But it's generally true across the organization when you get to AWS. You got to understand the shared service model that the cloud and AWS has, which is very different from your data center. And then you got to understand like these thousands of different services AWS provide. Each of these services has its own nuances, right? So the knowledge gap is going to be tremendous. How do you first ramp up yourself in the beginning, and more importantly, how do you kind of continuously stay on top of it, making sure you understand the different services that came out, right? So now these two gaps, in my experience, is very difficult for the security and compliance organization. Um, that's why it's a struggle, right? I think now, Mike, I'll hand it back to you. But aside from that, there's a lot more other challenges that Mike and Harry will go into as well.
Sure, that's awesome, and I like how we narrowed it to terminology of process gaps and knowledge gaps. And you explained it really kind of well when we think about how we changed from operating in a data center and into the automated provisioning environment of the cloud, and what that challenge that brings with that. And there again, it's sort of brought down to the process gaps and the knowledge gaps. But when we think about that now that everybody's got access, and of course, early on in the cloud, we saw a lot of the tail wagging the dog. It was a lot of developers that wanted to go to the cloud and get to the cloud. And they were kind of driving a lot of organizations into the cloud because, again, it was, we want to keep our people. They want to be happy. They need to keep expanding their skills. So we moved to the cloud. And now what you have is you've got a lot of different ways that businesses operate. So when we talk specifically about process gap or knowledge gap, why don't we get a little bit more specific in the types of gaps that we've seen at different clients, especially dealing with AWS tools that are designed to close these gaps and make sure that the systems are in a secure operating environment. So let's talk a little bit about what some of those specific gaps are.
Yeah, yeah, I can speak to that. So, in today's world, I mean, we're seeing clients, realizing the compliance challenges out there, right? So they are either building capabilities natively within AWS, or they're procuring third-party tools to try to address the issues. Going back to the points that Stephen mentioned earlier, there are some fundamental changes and gaps that need to be addressed first. Simply relying on a tool and thinking that the tool is going to solve me all the problems in the world is not realistic. For example, right? So if we look at the existing tool landscape, most of these existing tools today still place a very strong focus on identifying issues, reporting issues, and displaying them in a very nicely created dashboard. Um, However, if we think about compliance, right, simply showing the issues, it's great. I mean, it's a great first step, but that doesn't really move the needle, right? Um, our clients that we work with, we often see them procuring a tool, putting them in place. Now they start to see red flags being flown everywhere, right? There are things being reported, but they find themselves end up spending a lot of overhead just validating and deploying remediation. It's always, and what we describe as an ever-growing remediation backlog. Often we observe that you know that playing catch up is not moving the needle. Clients ends up with more work than what they can address to begin with. And then the other gap we observe is when you have a lot of these compliance issues being reported, they're not always being prioritized in the correct way. um, Stephen mentioned the developer community, right? So oftentimes we see a gap between security, compliance, audit organizations and the developer, meaning the people that are actually building things in the cloud, because context is often lost when issues are being presented in tools, whether it's native or third party. a seemingly high priority issue without, you know, a proper exploit should not be treated the same way as a seemingly lower priority issue with a clear exploit, right? But that context is usually lost. What makes it worse is the business context is also lost, right? Oftentimes when teams reach out, talk about issue remediation, making compliance better, or making the cloud environment, the AWS environment compliant, people often forget about the business context, right? They forget about the application, right? The underlying application, the business criticality of it, whether or not it is customer facing, does it even have an internet exposure, right? That really makes things difficult to not only uh, demonstrate compliance, but also actually addressing issues so you achieve, a better posture. And then the third gap we see relevant to the second one is the lack of correlation between um, these different issues getting reported, right? A standalone issue, as we see, often does not warrant immediate attention, right? But when they are combined, for example, if you have an OS level vulnerability and a very poorly configured compute instance, right? Those two things combined may present a much bigger risk, right? So correlation is definitely missing there. We're seeing vendors and AWS investing significantly to improve that. So that I think will be solved over time just due to the technology advancement. Um, and the last part is it comes back to the human part. It always comes back to the human part is um, the people that are hands-on remediating the activities are usually not the ones that are monitoring the compliance. And because we're all humans, we have different priorities in our life. We have different priorities at work. Um, we often see that there is a clear difference between how people view something as a critical issue. And usually we see frictions when it comes to like getting things resolved as quickly as possible. We see delays, and overall we see that it is difficult to look at the compliance uh, landscape and be like, hey, we not only can report them, but we can also solve them. With that said, I want to hand it back to Mike and let Mike talk about how, what are some of the success stories we're seeing and how we can potentially, solve these issues with some of the things that we offer from Protiviti.
Sure. Thank you, Harry. When you were talking at the end mostly about, kind of the business context and the people that are involved and how disparate their jobs are at times because, one team is not communicating at the same level as the other team. And we kind of look at that from a broader cybersecurity program and say, the program itself needs a little bit of work because if you're operating within silos, that's where you become disconnected. And as you said, it leads to a team remediating as not speaking to the same team that's identifying any of the issues that are coming up. So from the broader cybersecurity program, it's great to get a lot of a program involvement where all the teams are involved together. It's an excellent case study on how cyber can break down as opposed to cyber acting together in a fashion that increases your overall security posture and the maturity of the security organization. So with that, it's some of the things that we've been talking about and some of the gaps that we've talked about in AWS in particular, Protiviti's come out with a few solutions to address some of these concerns that we've now been working out with some clients and implementing some of these solutions and the tools that are available in the AWS marketplace. And I'll turn it over to Stephen to discuss some of the tools, Cloud Credential Guardian and Protiviti Cloud Shepherd, and why they're so effective in helping organizations close some of the gaps we've been talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So one of the two that we have from Protiviti is called Protiviti Cloud Credential Guardian, right? The short-term CCG. So with I talk about when you move to AWS, you got all these little things kind of like laying around, right? You got your engineer doing Lego style implementation, Lego style architecture, right? Well, one thing you have to realize is each of these Lego itself is it's an identity, right? It's an identity in AWS. So so now if visually, if you think about it, like because my kids play with Lego all day long, right? And then they started with like two pieces in the morning, and in the afternoon, like that becomes like hundreds and thousands of pieces. So it's that kind of problem, right? That's it's not that 1,000 pieces is bad, but each of these has its own identity. They talk to each other. So from your identity, security, and compliance angle, how do you actually manage that? Right? That becomes the core of the problem. Now, it's not that you don't want them to do it, but you want them to do it in a safe environment. You know what's talking to what. You know least privilege is being applied. So our Protiviti's Cloud Credential Guardian solution is for that, right? We are able to kind of give you a view of what are all the different identity that you have in the environment and go a step further, say, hey, based on this, let's help you kind of remediate these and build out a clean environment for your engineer to build your stuff on. So that's what Cloud Credential Guardian is all about. And Cloud Shopper is also great. Now, but I'm not going to take the thunder from Harry. So Harry, please introduce that.
Yeah. Yeah. So another solution we have is called Protiviti Cloud Shepherd. So in a nutshell, what it does is very relevant to what I described earlier, right? So instead of trying to focus all the energy on flagging the issues and then doing manual remediation, which is an ever-ending task, right? We help our client to think a little differently, change the mindset. How about we build security into your design from the get-go? And this is what Protiviti Cloud Shepherd does. Essentially, it does two things. We help our client design, develop, and implement and operationalize codified preventative controls. Um, and things that we can leverage natively within AWS with the very powerful tool of things like service control policies. So we can develop preventative controls to stop things from happening from the get go. Um, we can also work with our client to create Lambda functions that do automated remediation or what we call reactive controls. So the goal of Protiviti Cloud Shepherd is to design a infrastructure environment that is hardened to be safe enough for you to deploy resources. And if your resource deployment or the cloud resource provisioning process does not align with company policies, an automated change will happen to correct it from the get go. So that way, you will still see some issues being reported with your monitoring tools, but it will be significantly less. And when you actually go to remediate these issues, you are focusing on the high priority issues instead of trying to chase everything all together and just end up with an ever growing um, remediation backlog. So that's in a nutshell what Protiviti Cloud Shepherd does. Obviously, there's a lot of custom development required. We come in with a lot of existing templates and accelerators, and we can work with our clients to cater these to their specific use cases and to the point mentioned earlier to build the cloud in a secure way from the get-go.
Thanks, Harry. I love the description. I think what's really good about what we just heard from Cloud Credential Guardian and Protiviti Cloud Shepherd's two products is these are native solutions built on AWS's platform. They extend AWS's capability. This is not something, it's not a third-party tool that's coming in and doing some work for you. It's taking what exists and making it a better environment for your security team and they work together within AWS, built on AWS, using frameworks that are part of AWS. So these are all tools that are just designed to help increase your compliance and security, regulatory compliance. It's made to make it easier. They're designed to help your organization, your security organization, implement a lot more securely without having to go to a whole host of third-party tools to close these gaps. And it's so much better utilizing tools like that are designed for AWS, using AWS and extending AWS. And that's really the benefits of why Cloud Shepherd or why Cloud Credential Guardian. It's a very different type of paradigm than going out and saying, well, we'll try to fit with the native tools we have and close some of those gaps of knowledge. We've got a tool out there that will help close those gaps all on their own. And that's really the importance of what we were talking about in the solutions area of how we're helping. And the question is really, do I need both of these solutions? It sounds like, CCG, do I need that? And CCG being Cloud Credential Guardian. Do I need Cloud Credential Guardian? And do I need Protiviti's Cloud Shepherd? Or can I use either one of them? And, I'll throw that up to either Stephen or Harry to answer.
Well, I think you can do one or the other, right? It doesn't necessarily have to go together because they're solving two different problems. But obviously, if you want to make sure your AWS environment is secure from the get-go, yeah, I would do both.
Yeah, they solve different problems, but they're complementary to each other, right? A very good example to provide here is, Stephen mentioned identity, right? So when we provision the identities to users, whether it's a human user or a non-human user, we want to do it in an automated way, and then we want to align the identities provided to the privileges that we want to assign for the job that it in the least privileged way, and we want to make sure that the resources being provisioned by those identities are configured in a secure way, so we can automate all of that process altogether within your existing pipeline, and you will definitely see from the two solutions and find good synergy there. So they solve different problems, but we think they're complementary to each other. So if you want to, if you're already down the journey of building security program, especially natively from AWS, we would recommend both.
That's great. I appreciate the candor in that matter. Of course, we would like to see everybody using the tools that we've provided in both of them, because it's all about strengthening that security posture. So in wrapping this up here, I thank Harry and Stephen today for coming to discuss some of the challenges and how we see some of our clients behaving and some solutions that we have. The ultimate goal is to help everyone operate more securely and achieve that compliance on a regular basis. That's an ongoing basis. Everyone knows security is not about a quick or fast engagement or a project. We hate to use and hear those terms. Security is about running a program, an effective program that is always changing and evolving. And this is some of the things that we're trying to do, that Protiviti is doing to help our clients within the AWS environment to maintain that ongoing security and compliance program. And with that, I thank everybody very much for their time, and I hope you found the podcast very helpful.